Hello fellow cinephiles, the Film Dude here. Thanks for joining me today. So I've been with the release of a lot of John Woo films, I've been going back and watching the films of his I haven't seen. I've only ever really known him from his American films, and I like a couple of them, Hard Target and Broken Arrow, but over the years I've struggled with Face Off and Mission Impossible 2. So they've sort of done Imprint Asia, and they're releasing a lot of Asian cinema, and John Woo's been big on that with a lot of his films that haven't been available for a number of years. Are starting to show up. We're getting Hard Boiled and The Killer Layer as well, and once I see those I'll obviously do a review of them. But I thought I'd start with the one that they released recently, and that's A Better Tomorrow. Now this is part of a trilogy, with John Woo directing the first, involved in the second, and had nothing really to do with the third. And it loses its pace, and it loses what made it interesting as the films go on. But I want to start with the first film. Like I mentioned, this is my first foray into John Woo's early films. Haven't had access to a lot of his other older movies. And for a long time, besides the movies I mentioned, I struggled with him as a director. I just felt his stuff was a bit just action-based and that was it. But after reviewing a couple of his earlier films, I realised he's such a talented filmmaker, much more talented than I gave him credit for. He's a really great storyteller. And yes, his movies do have a lot of action, which he's known for, but it's the way he sort of does it that makes it more interesting, especially with his earlier films, his Chinese films, rather than his American films that just felt a bit watered down, and he wasn't involved as much as he ultimately was in his early career. With A Better Tomorrow, not only did he direct the film, but he also wrote it. And that's the first time I've really seen him write anything. A lot of his American stuff is based on other scripts and stuff like that. So it's really good to see an early filmmaker. And also he does make an appearance in the film, just in a small minor role. Blink and you'll miss him type thing, but he's in it. And I kind of like that. It felt like he's like saying, well, I'm going to make a movie, I'm going to appear in it somewhere, much like Hitchcock and those other great directors who used to do that sort of stuff. And I think this was his first collaboration with Chow Yun-fat, who went on to be a big star and who I'm a big, huge fan of. But there's just something about the collaboration between him and John Woo that really sort of cemented them as both really interesting actors and director. That cemented them as very talented people, and they would go on to do multiple films together and would give each other the career I guess they both wanted. A Better Tomorrow isn't quite exactly what I thought it would be, as it's I expected just action based upon his more modern films, but it is much more than that. Yes, he does have the action that he's known for, and there's some great sequences in it, some like three or four really great shootouts, and the ending's really fantastic, really captivated and done, but there's much more to that. He's much more focused on characters and story here than he is with his other films. It just felt different. It felt like my eyes were open to how talented he really was, and I never really got that sense from his other movies. So A Better Tomorrow really follows the story of Sung Tae-ho, a gangster who ends up in prison where he goes through a lot of change and ends up not wanting that life anymore. Upon his release, he tries to redeem himself in the eyes of his brother, who was ultimately in the police academy, and he didn't know his brother was a sort of a crook and has resentment towards him, while also trying to reconnect with a friend he left behind, Mark, played by Chow Yun-fat. And it is that sort of redemptive gangster sort of story. And I guess after watching this, I started to think of like something like Face Off, where it blurs the lines between good and evil and hero and villain and stuff like that, and I kind of like that. That's sort of a theme he uses a lot in his movies, about a character trying to redeem himself in some small way. And that's exactly what this sort of movie is. Like, it starts off, you think it's going to be this gangster thing, like a gangster movie, something like Goodfellas or something like that, with Chow Yun-fat's Mark, who looks super cool but it's kind of a little goofy, much like Chow Yun-fat is in real life, and the relationship between the two. And then we also see the bond between the main character and his brother, and how his brother doesn't know what he does, and when he finds out, he just hates him and resents him for what he's done. But it's really about how these people on opposite sides come together. That's another theme that John Woo uses a lot in his movies, where he has a lot of characters that are questionable, but that have to come together for some reason, to beat a more evil or for a greater good. I think all the performances are good here, especially from the three leads, with Tai Lung, Leslie Chung, and Chow Yun-fat. They all serve a purpose to the story. They're not side characters in someone else's film or story. They're actually part of the same thing, and they all serve a purpose within the story to move it along and to really show who each of the characters is and what they really want from life and how they interact with each other and why they interact with each other. I think Chow Yun-fat is a real standout here. I like his character Mark, who seems cool and put together, and he's kind of like this cool badass character that you would usually see in a John Woo film. But then when we shift to the second half, when his friend's gone to prison and the life that he's living now after avenging his friend going to prison, he's ultimately shot in the leg and he becomes sort of disabled like that. He can't walk properly. He's not the person he used to be. And it shows that he goes through a transformation, much like Tai Lung does. Tai Lung's character does as the gangster in prison. And he sort of just feels, in the film, he just feels like a cool and interesting character to begin with and a friend, and then he just sort of turns into this sad character that doesn't really know his place or purpose in the world anymore. And when his friend comes back, he's thrown back into this world. Even though his friend wants nothing to do with it, he can't escape that. He is that person. He hasn't gone through that big transformation that his friend has, and he's sort of stuck in that. He doesn't know how to do or be anybody else. He doesn't know how to do anything else or be anybody else. And that's why to me, he's the most compelling character. And he has his great action sequence, especially in the end. He's in a speedboat, there's a shootout at the end. He's just great in all of the action sequences in the film, and it shows a different side to Chow Yun-fat, I think, than what a lot of people know him to be. And a fun fact is, he never wanted to be an action star. They just sort of, after he did a few films with John Woo, they just sort of slipped him into there. But I think he's a much better actor than that. He's much more talented. He's a bit more light-hearted and funny than we usually see him on screen. And I think this sort of captures that. And I think a lot of his early films with John Woo do that. And it shows him in a different light, which I really like. I've always liked a story about redemption and a character changing his course and trying to become better, only to be swept up in things. In this, Tai Lung's character is threatened, and they're trying to force him back into that life, and he doesn't want anything to do with it. And the only way he can combat it is he has to go against them. He has to become free from them and be able to live the life he wants. And he tries really super hard. His brother keeps giving him a hard time, but you can tell he's really trying to change. And it's just the things that unfold in that. Chow Yun-fat's character, his friend gets beaten up. There's a lot of really cool moments between the two of them, and you see there's a great bond there. And I think, like I said, Chow Yun-fat and John Woo working together really craft something interesting, and both of them really shine when they're working together as a team. Like I mentioned, there's a number of action sequences. There's one at the start, which is really cool. There's one probably in the middle in the third act where Chow Yun-fat's character has to get something and he can't change who he is, so he does it in a violent way. And then the third act and the end. And then ultimately at the ending, this great shootout with all these men, and there's loud music playing, there's Chow Yun-fat coming in on a boat in a really cool way. This is the one thing that John Woo does better than anybody else, I think, or just as good as anybody else, is action. There's something about the way he does action films and what they say. Yes, they're over the top, there's a lot of wire work, there's a lot of explosions. The main characters always have two guns and they shoot a person 20 times, but there's just something about the way he does that. There's just something about the stories he tells within that, how he uses action to convey a lot of emotion. And it was the beginning of what John Wick would coin, or say they coined, with gun fu. Woo was doing it before anybody. He was doing it before John Wick. You can really look at these films and see how much John Wick got from them. Look, don't get me wrong, the John Wick films are great. I like all of them in different ways. But they weren't the beginning. They did reinvent this sort of action genre a little bit from what we had previous to that film, but they were really inspired by what John Woo was doing in his early Chinese cinema films. And he really was able to convey such emotion through his actions. And this film has great moments in it because of that. But it's the heart and soul of the film that really I connected to most. A character trying to redeem himself, stuck in a world that won't allow him to redeem himself the way he wants. Resentment he feels about what he did, resentment of characters against the main character. And the idea of friendship and the toll that it can take on each other, and how even when one person changes, the other person can't. They're stuck in that. That is who they are. Without that, they don't know who they are. Where the main character sort of knows who he is, and that's his ability to try and break free of his circumstances. It has great music in it, and the great use of slow motion, and like I mentioned, he makes the characters look cool. No one makes characters look as cool as John Woo does. He did it with Van Damme and Hard Target. He did it with Nick Cage and Travolta, which is strange, not a huge Travolta fan, but he did that in Face Off. He just has his ability to make characters look more cooler than anybody. And I think he is really an important part of the action genre and cinema in general. And I think that for people who aren't a fan of him like I wasn't, I recommend going back and seeing his early films. You really get to see him as a talented filmmaker and the stories he wants to tell and the characters he creates. I don't think he did a lot of writing after this, and I would really love to see him come back writing something else and working with Chow Yun-fat again, because I just think their collaboration is one of the best in cinema history. In some ways, this film felt a little bit like Departed or Infernal Affairs. The plot itself is heavily influenced by another film that came out in 1967 called Story of a Discharged Prisoner. This was a film that was really admired by John Woo and his producing partner. And this is a film that has inspired many things. John Wick, like I mentioned, and pretty much every sort of action movie after that. I think all the films that Chad makes, besides John Wick, kind of feel like that. They were a big inspiration. Like, this film was a big inspiration for them and what John Woo was doing at the time. And you can see the influences that not only Woo, but this film had on a lot of modern action filmmakers. I had such an interesting time. I had a great time with this movie, watching it, and it's made me start to realise maybe I'd been too harsh on a lot of the John Woo films that I had seen that I didn't overly like. So I've slowly been returning to them, and I've been seeing them in such a different, unique light. I think there's just something about him as a storyteller, and just I see him as an actual great director rather than just some guy who does action movies. And I've ultimately been able to appreciate him much more because of films like this. Anyway, that's it. That's all for me today. I hope you like this review, and if you did, please subscribe down the bottom. Follow me on Letterboxd and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.